Paint me like one of your French girls. Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? Today's gonna be kind of a fun episode because I have to get extra space shelves for my new studio. What are extra space shelves? Well, I'm glad you asked, random person in the comments below. Extra space shelves are usually about the third thing that I like to worry about whenever I'm building a new studio. The first thing, of course, is where my kiln and where my wheel are going to go, and I have to figure out the electricity in my house in order to actually put them in my house. For example, if I have a 100 amp house and that's how much power it can give me, I'm not exactly gonna put a giant kiln in this house and plug one in, or even put something close to that like a 60 amp kiln, because that's 60% of the power in my house, and if I want to run the dishwasher, AC, heck, the toaster all at the same time, it's gonna overload my house. The second thing I worry about is my shelves. Where is all of my pottery gonna go? And that's usually just for my workability. My greenware goes on this shelf, my bisque goes on this shelf, my glaze stuff goes on this shelf, and then I figure out where my glaze stuff goes afterwards. At maximum, I have maybe 6 shelves for that job alone. I can very easily delegate 2 shelves to greenware, 2 shelves to bisque, and 2 shelves that are very large, mind you, to glazeware. But that's not all the studio is. You see, after a while, you're gonna wanna keep some pieces. And not only that, you're gonna wanna decorate your space to make it really comfortable for yourself. Seeing as how I just moved into a brand new house, I have the honor of rebuilding my studio from scratch. And with that comes basically getting rid of a lot of old stuff, like this. I like to use shelf space like this. Number one, because it has a lower, a middle, a kind of middle lower, and then an upper tier. These are honestly just old spindles I got from an electric company. But I can place stuff all around the circle of this and multi-tier it. I like to put this right next to my wheel so I can set my computer up here, which is why there's a plug next to it. That way I can watch YouTube or listen to music or do whatever I do in order to make this place comfortable for me while I'm crafting. But this thing came with the house. I don't want it. Not only do I not want it, it just looks bad. It's very moldy, it's cracked in most places, it simply doesn't look good. And if I had a real choice, I would either replace this instead of worrying about working on it, sanding it down, and kind of refurbishing it, and just replace it with some of these shelves right here. These require a simple spray off. And look, I know there's some real crafters out there right now who are all,
just give me 5 minutes with this puppy. I can fix her up.
And to that person, I say 2 things. Number one, this just looks gross, and I would much rather, instead of pay someone to refurbish this thing I don't want, just get a new one. And number 2, this thing is not stable whatsoever. I'm barely lifting this. Okay, to be fair, I might be stronger than some people, but this thing is gonna come off the wall real easy. So today, we're gonna break this down. We're gonna go to Home Depot and see what else we can find to make our studio nice and comfortable. Look at this thing. This thing is so weak. It took me like 5 minutes to rip this apart. You see those shelves up there? Those shelves above my head right now? I'm coming for those next. That actually wasn't too bad. Okay, so I took everything apart within like 5 to 10 minutes, put all the wood on the side of the house. I'll probably take it to the dump later on. For now, we have to go shopping. Let's go to Home Depot and let's see what we can find that's, you know, maybe about this yay high. This shelf is the type of shelf that we'll actually be going for today, and this is the shelf that I suggest for most beginners, or at least if you're starting to build your own studio on your own. And there's, well, I would say a couple of reasons, but there's actually like 4 or 5 reasons. The first reason is that this type of shelf is relatively cheap. The biggest shelf that you can get from Home Depot and build by yourself within an hour or so is around $70, and it'll last you a lifetime. It's made of metal. Which brings me to my second point. This is made of metal, and unlike some of those wood shelves that maybe some of you were thinking about buying, you don't have to worry about how close this will be to your kiln. As I said in a previous video, your kiln must be at least 18 inches to 2 feet away from any burnable substance. That means you, your clothes, your cats, your dogs, your wife, anything that is burnable needs to be away from your kiln, at least 18 inches to 2 feet away, which is good because these types of shelves are made of metal. This makes them really good for storing pottery directly next to your kiln. Let's say you're loading your kiln and you just want to take it from point A to point B, from right next to your kiln to inside the kiln. And this makes that extremely easy to do. because, well, it's metal. It's not as much of a fire hazard. You can put it as close to your kiln as you want. Which doesn't sound like a big deal, but once you actually get your kiln and you buy a shelf and it's made of wood and you must have it really far away from your kiln, you're gonna realize you wasted about 2 feet of space just because you didn't get a metal shelf. The third thing is that these have a lot of metal slots in them. A lot of people message me and ask me what type of shelves they should get, and I always suggest these specifically because of these slots. There's a bunch of stuff at IKEA and Home Depot that'll actually help you maximize space for your shelves when you get deeper into your ceramic artwork. And you really don't even have to buy those things. For example, I can very easily get my calipers and just put them through one of these slots right here, and that is where my calipers go from now on. If I'm throwing next to my shelf, that's where I'm gonna grab them from, and that's where they will always be. And that little trick actually works for almost anything. You can easily even get your little dipper tongs here and put them right through the slots, and as many as you have, it'll hold them. You can't really do that with a solid shelf. These slots actually have a lot of utility. The fourth thing is that if you do decide to put bisqueware on these shelves, I highly suggest you get some type of wood to put on here. I will show you how to maximize that space later. But if you're one of the people who don't want to use this, and you simply want to use this, the drying process goes a lot easier because you now have all this air coming from underneath to your pottery. That one might sound a little bit weird, but let's imagine you have one of these plates here and you put it right here, right? The air is going to be able to travel from the bottom onto your plate or on your pottery, which will slowly dry out the bottom as well as the top. Many people that just have metal shelves to store their pottery end up putting their stuff to dry directly on the metal, and that doesn't really get air to the very bottom of your pot. But of course, you kind of need that air to dry out your pottery so that you can trim it later on. So the top ends up being very dry, while the bottom of your trim ends up being a little bit more wet. Usually, I would suggest just getting a wooden board and drying them out because the wood will suck up the water once you take it off your wheel like this. But if you don't have one of these, this is really good for air circulation on your pottery, technically. And the fifth, and probably the least useful thing, but honestly it matters a lot to me, is that these shelves have a little tiny foot pad at the very bottom that is very adjustable for height. While you're building these, or while nothing's on it preferably, you can very easily adjust these feet by turning them right or left, and they'll change height just a little bit, which is very important for people who don't have completely leveled floors. Otherwise your stored pottery is gonna be all, no, yeah, it's straight. This is very important for people like me because my garage floor that I'm building my studio in isn't straight. It technically goes out to my driveway, and of course my driveway is slanted because that's, you know, like most driveways are slanted. This means that the further I get away from my house, the further down slope it will go. So of course, unless I get an adjustable shelf like these ones, my shelf is gonna be a little bit crooked. But with these, you can very easily just adjust these feet however you want. See, I've already raised this one up a little bit. Not to mention, these shelves come in about 3 or 4 different sizes. I just chose the biggest size that I can get my hands on and fit in my car because you can technically adjust these right here. And that's another point I kind of forgot to tell you, is that you see this down here, how this is way bigger than the rest of these shelves? Well, that's because I put all my bigger stuff down there, or if I ever want to make something that's 2 feet tall. As I build this shelf, I can very easily just make this shelf as big as I want. If I really wanted to, I could have easily just made one shelf down there and one shelf up here. I didn't need these middle shelves. These things are very adjustable. So let's get going to Home Depot and see if we can find ourselves one more of these. Pro tip, if you go into Home Depot with sunglasses on, it increases your chance of actually knowing what you're doing around Home Depot by 20%. Bonus points if you actually don't need the sunglasses, but you put them on top of your head as you look real hard at items like this. You see this right here would be perfect because it has space on the bottom of it so that air can get to the bottom of my pots, and that's really what I want. The issue that I have is that this looks like the end of it, but no, that's not the end of it. It actually goes even higher, and I don't need something that tall. Plus it says assembly required, and I don't want to build this giant thing, so we're gonna keep looking. So I found these shelves right here. I actually already have some of these shelves. I think I'll probably get more of them simply because they're easy to put together. They're relatively cheap for what they do, and as I mentioned earlier, they have that bottom space. They have little grates underneath so that my pottery can get air from the bottom and the top instead of me putting it on something like this where there's no air getting through this. You know, the bottom of my pottery won't dry as well. So I might get one of these three. That one in the middle is kind of little, but I do have one of those. The thing that I know from experience is that these are very easy to put together. So I can just very easily, like they come like this and you just put them on top of one another. Not to mention the thing that I really like about these is that they come in black and silver, and they come in different sizes. So this is the small one, right? There's the medium one, and then they have one that is ultra super 6 shelf big. A super big one, just in case you kind of want to get one or two of these and call it a day. You know what? I don't think I need a 6 shelf one, but I really want it really badly, so we're just gonna take this one.
No! God! No! God, please, no!
As I mentioned before, we're probably gonna have to take these shelves down, seeing that thing is like 60 something inches tall, and I'm pretty sure this is more than 60 something inches. So we have to take these down. When you're putting up shelves like this, specifically for your pottery, you really want a designated space specifically for your pottery. You don't want it to be too close to your wheel. You don't want it to be too close to the outside door. You don't want it to be too close to the cat box if you have one. You want your bisqueware to be as clean as possible. Now, if you had a shelf specifically for glazed ware, that doesn't really matter because that's already done. It's not like that can get any dirtier. But the excess dust and anything behind or around this that might get your bisqueware dirty will technically affect your glaze, and sometimes it causes crawling. It's one of the reasons why I don't sweep a lot around my bisqueware. So this clear space here is actually very important to me. You don't really need a blank wall for just throwing, because if you're just throwing, the back splash wall is probably going to get dirty anyway, considering that most people are not clean throwers. Or maybe you have a kiln, you're probably putting non-burnable things like metal shelves around that kiln anyway, just for precaution's sake. But as far as your actual product goes, it needs a nice open clean space, at least a couple of feet around it to make sure that it doesn't get any dirt on it. Surprisingly enough, this actually isn't that heavy. I thought for something super huge it would be extremely heavy. But if you are in fact planning on painting the inside of your studio garage, I highly suggest you get that step done first and then go ahead and build your racks. It's gonna be a pain in the butt when the painter asks you to move everything from the walls and you have everything on this giant shelf that you just built, and now you have to do all that extra work. Just have the walls painted, build the shelves, and that way you don't have to do that extra step. I am so confident in my skills to build this because I've built one of these before. I actually threw away the instructions. We're freeballing this. Oh no, there's a whole other pack of stuff right there. Yeah, I don't remember this when I was building it last time. Cut.
To get an accurate balance, count the lines on the legs for each clip. Pressure to the wire frame.
The thing that I really like about these types of shelves is that you could technically stop here. If you ever wanted something just this high but also this wide, you can very easily just stop right here and that's your shelf. But they give you these pieces because it was intended to be taller. I have built one of these before and just left it right here because I really didn't need this one to be this tall at my backyard. So I just made one that was this tall instead. But we're going full force today, so... This specific type of shelf that I got from Home Depot is designed for you to build the length of your own shelves. For example, these stoppers here are designed for you to put them at any place on this long bar, so that the shelf that you put on stops itself at a certain point of the bar. I'm sure most people know this, but this is very valuable. This means that I can very easily make a shelf down there, a shelf right here, and a shelf up there, and have 3 shelves and call it a day. But of course, not every single one of my pieces is going to be this big. So if I felt like it, I could very easily designate certain pieces if I know I'm going to make them certain heights. For example, myself and Lindsay make a bunch of cups, and usually make our cups around 6 to 8 inches tall. That means I only really need this to be about 9 to 10 inches tall before I need another shelf. This shelf would essentially be designated my mug shelf or my cup shelf. If I know for a fact that I don't make bowls over 4 inches tall for my next shelf, that means my next shelf essentially only has to be 4 inches above that. It's not that difficult, and you save a bunch of space. I actually prefer building these shelves for that reason, partly. Now, this assumes that if this one section is for mugs, or if I put a little label here that says for mugs only, that mug will never go above this space. It sounds ridiculous to make a mug this big, but while you're crafting stuff, sometimes you just get lost in the moment and you really have to remind yourself, oh, this is where mugs go. Everything in my studio has a place to keep it nice, neat, and make sure I can find everything in a timely manner. I think adults call it organization, but I wouldn't know. This again is one of my preferred reasons for getting a shelf like this. I can fit stuff as large as myself fitting on the bottom shelf on this bottom shelf. Just in case I want to make stuff that's really big one day or fire stuff that's really large one day, I can store them down here. Don't leave out the possibility, especially if you have a very nice square studio or garage, that you can very easily make an L space with these shelves. But if this is going to be the cutoff point for my studio space, just because I do store a lot of other stuff in my garage, then that's fine. Don't be afraid to play with the space that you have and think outside of the box. Not everything you have must be up against a wall. And that's actually pretty much it. These shelves are relatively cheap for what you would get for this amount of storage space. They're fairly easy to put them together. This took me maybe about 30 minutes. I don't know why I'm looking at my hand. I don't have a watch. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I really just want to give you guys what I think is the best suggestion for shelves that you don't have to buy that's purely for pottery. You can very easily go to a ceramic store, or you can very easily go online and look for something that is ceramic specific. But what's really gonna happen is that they're gonna sell you a shelf with a couple of bells and whistles, and it's probably gonna be double if not triple the price of this thing right here. This thing is pretty cheap for what it is and really easily accessible. I went to Home Depot and got this and built it within 30 minutes. Took me 30 minutes to get it, took me 30 minutes to build it. I have a new shelf in about an hour. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. If you'd like to see any of my artwork, the links are always down below for your beautiful Potter eyes to see. I'm actually extremely happy that you guys are coming along with me on this journey of rebuilding my studio, because to me, when I walk in here, the walls are gross, and there was, at the beginning of this video, there was a shelf that was moldy and I didn't need. And over time, you guys are gonna see this place turn into a real Potter studio. Something that's functional for everyone to kind of copy. Kind of like a little blueprint. But if I did it all in one episode, it would be like 2 hours long, so we're breaking it up. You guys have a good rest of your day, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week. Or, hear me out.